Harnessing Contrast. This is the podcast by Dustin Kirkham. Contrast is a very interesting topic. My mom, when I was growing up, she would say, contrast. Every time she'd hear a funny joke, every time she saw a good advertisement. And at first I didn't really know what she was talking about. But as I grew older and I started to think about, contrast, and how it affected the world around us, it dawned on me that nothing is more important in this world than contrast. And let me tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from here. The very core of all human understanding is our ability to tell one thing from another, to be able to find a difference between one principle and the next, or one object in the next. This all hinges on the human's mind's ability to find contrast. And when we find that contrast, we use it as a building block to create an understanding about who we are, where we are, who others are. It's crucial. But this podcast is more so about leveraging contrast in the workplace to become a better leader, to become a better business owner. Really, you name it. If you're able to find a gap in an industry and then leverage that gap with an idea that's so different that you can really catch people's attention, then you are harnessing contrast and you are leveraging yourself into success. I just wanted to give a few examples here of people who succeeded in harnessing contrast. Right off the top, our good man, Steve Jobs. I know there's a million books written about Steve Jobs. He's got his biography. It's good stuff. But let's just talk for a moment about his key success, his first key success, and that was the Macintosh computer. Up until this point, computers were solely operated using keyboards. You type in a command and your computer on the desk would respond. Super basic. But Steve Jobs wanted to make it more user-friendly. He introduced the mouse on a large scale. And the mouse caught everyone's attention because suddenly computers were way more usable, way easier to understand, and way more fun. He had effectively created contrast in his industry, so much so that every other computer company had to adapt to his new invention, and they had to do exactly what he was doing if they wanted to stay relevant in any way, shape, or form. And we all know that Steve Jobs went on to combine media players with phones to create the first iPhone, changed the phone industry, created the smartphone, and really changed everything about the world that we know today. You got a question that's a real stumper? Ask Siri about it. Or Google. Or really any other software that any other company is trying to use to mimic Siri, the first, if you will, AI that you can speak to. It's revolutionized everything again and again and again. That's what Apple does. They're good at it. They're good at finding contrast and then leveraging it in the industry. If you don't believe me, and I think most of you probably already do, but here's a fun little test. I want you to go to Samsung's website or Microsoft's website, and you're going to notice that immediately right off the bat, they're going to be shoving a sale in your face. They're going to say, there's 20% off on this product here, or, come over to this product here. We could probably leverage this little sale for you for Father's Day. Woo! When you go to Apple's website, they hit you front and center with an image of their newest product, and they say something catchy like, it's here. Or they'll say something like, you think you understand fast? This is faster, or something cheesy like that. You honestly could have a third grader write this stuff, but it's so simple. It's on usually a completely black background or a completely white background. The idea is just to create contrast visually, but also in the experience. Because when a user sees that and they've been looking at Microsoft all day, they feel like they're at home. That's contrast. And in this podcast, we're not really going to be deep diving into products and how contrast is used there, because honestly, you could get a whole degree in that. But in this podcast, well, I guess our topic, you could get a degree in this too, but we're going to be talking mostly about leadership and how to make a business stand out from the pack. So, harnessing contrast, how can I be a better leader to my team? And also, how can I use contrast to leverage my business in an industry that may be already too saturated? We're going to be talking to CEOs. We're going to be talking to doctors. We're going to be talking to mid-level managers. We're also going to be talking to entrepreneurs and then I'm going to be adding a few tidbits myself, and also whoever else wants to jump on the podcast, I'm happy to have them on there. I'm also open to the idea of just talking to line employees and hearing what they have to say about the leaders that they've enjoyed working for, in addition to what kind of leadership style they want to take on someday when they're given the opportunity to be in such a role. For the sake of this episode, since I'm more or less flying solo, I'd like to just break apart some fantastic leadership that we've seen in the past and just good old classic American history. Back in the 1960s, President Kennedy was given a difficult job. He was the President of the United States during the Cold War, the Vietnam War, and a bit of a downturn in the economic world. Can you imagine the headaches, the stomach aches, the stress that he was going through? He needed a win with the American people. Whether he knew it or not, whether or not he was labeling it in his mind, he knew that he needed to leverage and harness some contrast for the United States of America. And so without consulting NASA, he went to the public stage and said, by the end of the decade, we are going to land a man on the moon and return him safely back to the Earth. And this was outrageous, because at the time, the United States had barely gotten a man into space, and rocketry was a new world that we knew nothing about, and the Russians already seemed to be miles and miles ahead of us. I guess for the Russians, it would have been kilometers. But you get the idea. We were behind, we were losing, and when Kennedy said this, it created a lot of contrast. And this was a huge, awesome stroke in leadership. His leadership was, we are the United States. We are those who win. We, as Americans, win. We don't fold, we don't break, we win. And we win for the right reasons, for freedom, for the people. And that was such great contrast to what the country had been experiencing, because we were involved in wars that we weren't sure about, and we wanted the right reasons on the right stage for the right people. It was just a great stroke for Kennedy, but my goodness, it must have freaked out everybody at NASA. That was quite the commitment that they weren't ready for. And so, of course, the country exploded into trying to figure out how to land a man on the moon. Math was changing all the time. Money was not even a question. Billions and billions of dollars went into the Apollo program. But this is what I think is really interesting. When I talk to most of my peers, or even just the average middle-aged American, people don't know how many times we've been to the moon. Think about it for a moment. Just take a quick guess to yourself. How many times have we been to the moon? A lot of you are probably saying, well, we probably just went once, right? With Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, those great American heroes, and they landed on the moon, danced around, and left. Well, actually, we went to the moon 6 times. Would have been 7, but 6 times if Apollo 13 hadn't had their issues. But let's just talk about that for a moment. Apollo 11 got the big stage. That's the mission with Neil Armstrong. They got the big stage because they had done it. They had been the first people to land on the moon. And that is... Talk about contrast. Holy cow. Could you imagine if we could have seen the audience? I don't know if you believe in God, but if there was people on this side of a veil and people on the other side of the veil that already died, billions and billions of people had looked up and seen the moon, wondered what the heck it was, what's up there, can I go up there, can birds go up there? These big questions that we didn't have answers to. And for the first time in human history, Neil Armstrong, a normal human being, was walking on the moon. Of course that got the attention of the whole world. They weren't just American heroes, they were heroes to the whole world. Mankind had done something amazing. But then Apollo 12, we don't really hear tons about Apollo 12. We hear a lot about Apollo 13. There was a movie made, and that's because they were going to go for a routine mission to the moon, but didn't make it. It had an explosion, had to turn around and come back, and miraculously they all survived. That's quite a bit of contrast against Apollo 11, if you ask me. But then there's Apollo 14, 15, 16, 17. We don't hear about these things. And remarkably, each time we had a mission, the mission became more and more complex. Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong, that first mission, they spent roughly just vertical of 2 hours on the surface of the moon. before they kicked it back to Earth. Apollo 17, they spent over 18 hours on the surface of the moon. They were driving around their lunar rover. They were collecting samples. They were hard at work up there. Like 18 hours, that's a full working day if you ask me. But we don't talk about that because all of the contrast, all of the limelight had already been stolen by Neil Armstrong and Apollo 11 5 missions earlier. And there was, I don't know if you know this, Apollo 18. That was supposed to happen, but that got canceled and defunded because things were just too chaotic on Earth to fund another $30 billion mission. But really what I like to think here is that the moon landings had just lost their shine and their contrast, and people didn't care for things that don't have contrast. It's really quite curious. And so for NASA to stay airborne, they needed to come up with a new mission. And they had to cut costs. And thus was born the space shuttle. And the space shuttle had a wonderful mission to go up to space and come down from space and be reused over and over again, something the Apollo missions couldn't do. But then they needed a mission also that would catch the public eye. And so they decided that they were going to build the International Space Station. Yeah, I know. The public knows we can get people up in space. That's no big deal. We got people on the moon. It is what it is. But the International Space Station proposed we are going to have people live in space. And suddenly this started to sound a lot like Star Trek or Star Wars or some other wonderful sci-fi franchise that people had fallen in love with. We were going to put people up in space and they would be weightless for weeks and months at a time. And because of that contrast, nobody had ever lived in space before. They're back in the public eye. Space shuttle was funded. Several space shuttles were built. And the space shuttle had a great long life and it did terrific things for science, along with the International Space Station. But you can follow that cycle once again. The space shuttle fell out of popularity, lost funding, and now NASA is kind of looking for some different forms of contrast. But let's go back to John F. Kennedy here for a moment. His ability to recognize what was important and then leverage that, that's what made him a great leader. He was able to identify we need hope. And then he recognized that a big success in space would give the American people hope over Russia or whoever we considered to be our enemies at the time, even with ourselves. And so that leadership style is something that we can carry into the workplace today. I don't know why, we as leaders can be so blind in the workplace. If your people are showing up already frowning, or if they're sitting down at their desk and they look miserable, how many of us actually take the time to sit down and talk to them and figure out what's going on? I bet you a lot of people listening to the podcast right now are not willing to admit how often they actually sit down and talk to their team. Because they're busy with something else, maybe paperwork, deadlines, or whatever they got to do. But true leadership is identifying a problem and then identifying a solution. And that's contrast right there. That's what makes someone go home from work and talk to their spouse and say, you know what happened today? My boss sat down and talked to me about me and about my family. And I thought the whole time that he was just using it as a cheap segue to talk about work. But that wasn't the case. As soon as he got up from this conversation, he left. The last thing we talked about was our dog. He didn't want to say anything about work. And then they go and tell their friends about it too. And that's the kind of contrast that people are going to talk about because they've never had a boss that does that. And that excites them. And the next day, how likely do you think it is that they come into work smiling? Exactly. They're eager to get to work now that they feel like they're valued by their boss. And in turn, they're also going to feel way more motivated to be productive. There's so many studies out there. It's almost common knowledge at this point that a happy team is a productive team. A happy employee is a productive employee. And this all hinges on the kind of contrast that you can create for your team as a leader. Are you taking the time to speak to them? Are you taking the time to give them the benefits that they'd like? Do they want longer breaks? Do they want the ability to get it from their desk more often than they do? It seems a little bit like a gamble because if you start giving these things to your employees, they're just going to run away with it and you're going to lose productivity. Yeah, I mean, maybe. There are special employees out there, we all know, that aren't going to do squat no matter what you do. But when you've got a good employee, one that is solid, hardworking, and is driven, and then you give them these benefits, oh man, they're going to be happy, and they're going to be the most productive employees you ever had. And while you might think you're being tricked by your own illusion, you'll have other managers come to you and say, how on earth are you managing your team? Why are they so happy? Why are they so willing to do their work? I can't seem to do that with my team. I give them deadlines, and I tell them when they need to get things done, and they just look at me and snarl. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that good leadership is the absence of deadlines. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying good leadership that creates contrast that your employees can be excited about is the deadlines, it is that hard tack, get to work kind of stuff, but it's partnered with, and I'm going to say this lightly because I know a lot of people disagree with this, friendship. Just because there isn't a better word in the English language. You got to be friends with the team that you're coaching. And maybe those friendships don't need to extend outside of the workplace, but they need to be happy to see you. They need to smile when they see you walking their way. And there's a very fine balance that you need to achieve between coaching somebody and being their friend. And when you've got that blend going, they're going to know that you care about their success and also them as a person, and that you are interested in leveraging that person into another role if possible. You're out to look out for them. That's what true leadership is about. So going back to John F. Kennedy again, he did this with the United States. He got on our level, and instead of saying, we need to fix the economy, we need to hit these numbers, we need to have a vote on this, blah, 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 he said, everybody, I understand your concern. Times are scary. So we're going to do this as a country. I want you to just think about the significance of landing on the moon for a second. Scientifically, it's outrageously awesome. But Neil Armstrong, when he got up there, he just kind of like kicked around some rocks and put up a flag. What did that actually do for the country? What that did was prove to the country that we are Americans, we can win, we can succeed, but it requires hard work. See, and there's that relationship. We need to work hard as a country, but we can succeed in fun things also as a country, and it's a symbol of great leadership. It's a symbol of the American people. Landing on the moon is a historic event because of what it meant to the people, and you can do that in the workplace too. When you get together and you have a fun activity with your team on company time, that's a symbol of company culture. That's a symbol of your leadership. You're showing your people, we care about you, we care about your success, we want you to be productive, but we want you to enjoy your life because, my goodness, you spend a lot of time at that desk. And that's going to be the total of your life is how you spend it. So, we're welcoming you to the podcast right now. We're so glad you're here. Hopefully you enjoyed this little mini episodes talking about contrast, what it is that we're trying to get at here. And hopefully you've had a few ideas just listening to some fun history on how you can harness contrast in your workplace with your team. But do stay tuned because I'm not that experienced in the workplace just yet. And we're going to be talking to a lot of people who are. And they've got great ideas on leadership, and they've got great ideas on how to be better leaders, to connect with your people, and to drive them to productivity and success. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your day.